After almost 2 weeks in this part of the world, I'm almost used to the time zone. So we'll see how I do. So I'm delighted to be here in New Zealand, a country that, has a lot of very interesting things happening in the realm of library management. I try to follow, libraries in as many different parts of the world as I can, in languages I can read, and even, your version of English is perfectly understandable to me. But anyway, I just want to talk to you today about some of the trends that I see in the realm of library automation systems and discovery systems, and what I think is driving some of the changes and why I think it's so important for we know libraries are changing. We need to have technologies that adapt to that kind of change. So one of the things that I spend practically every waking moment of my life doing is trying to gather information about the world of library automation systems. I run this Library Technology Guides website, which is kind of a repository of all the information that I can get my hands on regarding the technologies, the products, the companies that we spend so much of our resources on. I think somebody in the world needs to kind of keep their eye over the shoulder of a lot of the companies that are involved and kind of follow these interesting projects and so forth. So Library Technology Guides, librarytechnology.org is its URL, is something that I hope that you'll take a look at and kind of help me keep up to date. It's not a wiki purely, but it certainly has ways for those of you out there to submit information about the libraries, the automation systems that you run, and so forth. It's based on that data that I'm able to try to monitor some of the trends of what happens with library management systems in various parts of the world. So this is a table that's automatically generated out of my website based on the data in the libwebcats directory of libraries around the world. I've got about 60,000 libraries in the database right now. And so it's important to have information about the library. It's where it is, where it's located, makes it show up on maps okay. And it is a directory of libraries that gets a lot of use by the general public. So if you type in the name of your library, especially if you don't have good search engine optimization on your website, chances are my entry for that library may appear even before the library's own. So I get about 2 million hits a month, a lot of it due to the library directory. So you can see here I can generate tables based on the automation systems. So this probably isn't news to you. It's just an example of how I use that data. And then for public libraries, and 319, I think it's probably pretty close to most of them in New Zealand, and then the different automation systems that are used. Some are familiar to those of us in the other side of the world, and some of them not so much. And one of the interesting things as I travel the world is to learn as much as I can about the different library management systems that are specific to countries or regions and so forth. So really a lot of interesting things happening in the development of those products. And so I care not so much, I care what you're running now, but I also care about kind of the movement of things. What system did you use before, so you can have the historical information, and then are you thinking about a change? Have you made a change? Have you signed a contract for a next generation system? Because it's really that movement in library technology that I think is of special interest, and I try to organize the database to be able to track that. One of the reports that I can automatically generate is one like this, which says, well, what systems did libraries choose in a given year? This year is 2011, and that shows, the systems that are most popular that libraries are moving to, and then on the right side of the page are all these links of the other systems or the ones that they moved away from. So you can click on those links and get lists of those actual libraries. So, that's kind of data I think is very helpful for when libraries are thinking about moving to a system. Find other libraries that look like them to see what kinds of movements that they're making, what kind of systems are serving those libraries well. The the complement of that is what I call the reverse turnover report. So this shows what systems libraries are moving away from. So chances are you don't want to be implementing a system that most libraries are moving away from. So this is a way of generating a table based on that. Now, it's not always bad to be on this list. For example, we saw on the previous list that Sierra from Innovative Interfaces was the top one there, so a lot of people have signed for that. 2011 was actually a record year for Innovative in signing contracts for their next generation system. So in a way, it's not so bad that their previous system, Millennium, is on the top of the list that libraries have signed to move away from. So you got to look at it a little bit carefully, just because you're on the list of libraries that are moving away from a product, isn't bad if you're keeping it within the family. But then if you look at systems where, most of the libraries are going to competing products, then that might not be such happy news for the vendor involved. So, this is kind of raw data for you to explore, but, make sure that you look at it carefully and don't kind of misread what it says. I've spent a lot of time following the companies that sell us technologies. So this is a graphic that I've had around for a while that I keep adding to. I haven't put 2012 on it yet. Nothing major has happened yet this year. But you can see, the ongoing impact of the mergers and acquisitions in the library automation industry. That over time, we've moved from being a kind of fractured industry. You look at about the 1990s and before, where there's a lot of companies selling a lot of different products that are overlapping for a limited market. So I guess the global economies didn't support that so well. So in recent years, there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions resulting in a far fewer number of but larger companies and fewer products. And my take on this is that there's going to be fewer products over time as well. That a lot of companies that have purchased other companies have maintained those legacy products, in the long run. In the short term, I think things are usually relatively smooth, but in the long run, any company mostly wants to have one product. So, the impact is going to be more integration of technologies as well. There are good and bad ways to do that. If you have legacy products and you keep those going long enough, you develop a next generation system that is appropriate for the next, cycle of technology, then that's a pretty gentle approach. But anytime you pull a system out from under libraries that weren't anticipating that change, they may not necessarily react to that positively. Libraries have very long planning processes. I got an email the other day from someone who asked me, how long does an average library keep their system? And for libraries in the US, I think I just did public libraries, it's 10 years. You think, well, we got to look every 5 years. Well, hardly any library buys this new system after 5 years. You're barely getting going after that time. So 10 years is the average. You see some libraries using the same system for 25 years. So that can be a good thing. That can be a bad thing. My view is that you've got to make sure that the technology is helping you do what you do and not hindering what you do. And I think there are times it can be that as well. My overarching concern when I think about the technology that's used in libraries is that it's the right kind of technical infrastructure to support whatever it is that library does strategically. It's easy for things to get out of sync. When libraries change systems every 25 years and the world changes every 2 years, you're going to have technology that not necessarily supports what you need to do today. So it's really important to try to, keep that in sync. There are a lot of things in motion here. One of the things I observe is that the same software can't necessarily support all the different kinds of libraries because I think that libraries are becoming more different over time. In the time that I've been involved in libraries, the differences between academic libraries and public libraries to me seem a lot wider. In the days when we're all managing print collections, the common problems were much the same. But as academic libraries have become more oriented towards scholarly articles and public libraries more toward, any technology that engenders engagement and e-books and those kinds of things, the problems seem more different, all the time. And then school libraries and special libraries have been different all along. In a special library, it's all about enterprise knowledge management, a whole different suite of technologies that keep those libraries going. When I look at libraries, as I said, they're a moving target right now. They're changing very rapidly. In the time that I've been involved in academic libraries, I saw the transition from, runs and runs of journals that that take up half the library to purely electronic, where all of those periodical sections are being shipped en masse to offsite storage because things like JSTOR have replaced it almost entirely. That is a fundamental shift in what academic libraries do. You spend something like 80% of their budgets on electronic content. Print is still important, but the proportions are so different. And you look at public libraries, the circulation of physical books is still the bread and butter. They're very busy. They can't keep up with it. E-books are coming on the scene. It's additive to that, but it's just more and more of kind of the circulation of materials for them. And then all libraries have more complicated collections than ever before. Print, electronic, digital. The problem is getting harder all the time. The way that we manage metadata has got to keep up. The day of kind of the standard copy cataloging model is going to be hard to sustain, especially in times where we're buying collections in bulk, where we're buying subscriptions to ebooks, where you might get 30 or 50,000 at a time. The legacy models of cataloging, may not quite keep up with that. We need much more efficient workflows when it comes to the way that we deal with metadata in the current times. What that metadata is changing all the time. Being married to a cataloger, I'm acutely aware of the transition to RDA. It's like a four-letter word. It's just been a huge amount of overhead for what seems to me a very small incremental improvement in what that metadata does for library management. But that is a baby step compared to this fundamental transition that we will face with the demise of MARC. That the Library of Congress is already studying what it will use to replace MARC, because MARC was a standard built in the 60s and 70s for exchanging binary records between mainframes. It's not necessarily the best way to represent data and metadata in this time of open link data. So expect really fundamental changes in this next decade when it comes to how we deal with metadata. And so if you have something that's hardwired into MARC and copy cataloging, that might not be the most forward-looking approach. Technologies are changing. I've seen the transition from mainframes to client server. Right now we're in the transition from client server to web-based and cloud computing. And it's just as fundamental of a paradigm shift where the systems based on client server technology are just as doomed as the ones that would be based on a mainframe today. So, that transition will take the next decade, but it's a transition that's beginning now, and we need to start thinking about that relative to the kinds of technologies that we're implementing. This just illustrates that paradigm shift from those kind of three phases of technology that we've seen. Part of the realm of cloud computing, cloud computing is just kind of a buzzword. What do you really mean by it? What I mean by it are things like software as a service, multi-tenant, single instance software as a service as kind of the best example of that. Things like infrastructure as a service and so forth. I just wrote a book on cloud computing, so I'm really kind of want to make sure we're not using cloud computing just as a buzzword, but we really understand what it means and kind of its implications for the way that libraries manage their operations. True cloud computing enables data as a service, that we're not working with isolated bibliographic and holdings databases that are special to our library, but we're really moving more into an era of knowledge bases as driving automation, that we're able to kind of tap into knowledge bases of electronic resources, bibliographic collections, and so forth to radically simplify the way that we describe our collections and to participate more deeply in larger pools of metadata that provide more opportunities for resource sharing, more efficient cataloging, all those kinds of things. So, the isolated bibliographic database, I think, will eventually fade away as well. Because we've got to have more and more strategic resource sharing and collaborative work. One of the trends that I'm following has to do with kind of the consolidation of more and more libraries into larger implementations of automation and resource sharing. Again, the one library, one automation system model, I think, will fade away in favor of regional, statewide, and national systems over time. I think that sharing is kind of built into our DNA, and I think that technology these days is ready to enable that in ways that it hasn't in the past. So one of the threads of library automation that I think is really important is the open source movement of integrated library systems. I would point, it's an interesting point of contrast to a lot of the systems that are offered under proprietary licenses. The three that I follow most closely that have the most traction are Koa, Evergreen, and Kuali-Ole, just to kind of mention those in passing, but you can't speak in New Zealand about open source or about library automation in general and not recognize the incredible contribution of the Koa ILS to the broader world. It is really been transformational, I would say. When I look at library automation, I've got a couple of pictures here. So when you look at it worldwide, you can see that Koa is really adopted in pretty much all the continents of the globe. Maybe not any in Antarctica, but neither is any other system. So even in the United States, I would say that maybe 10 to 15, maybe a little bit more % of new implementations are on some kind of open source system, and Koa is a large percentage of that. Quite a bit in Europe, as you can see, naturally here in New Zealand, some in Australia, but where it's really making an impact is the developing world. Look at countries like Argentina, where there are thousands of public libraries that are getting ready to implement a version of Koa kind of nationwide. And the school library system is doing similar things. The Philippines, all the public libraries are implementing a version of Koa. So, this is really, quite a remarkable contribution to library automation worldwide that I really appreciate. Even in the United States, where they're competing against, the international systems, you can see a very strong deployment of Koa. So you know how it is in your part of the world, just to recognize that even my part of the world, that Koa is really kind of a big deal. But it's also part of a broader set of concerns relating to open systems. Libraries hate having their data captive to a black box. It's important that libraries own their data, be able to do with their data as they please above and beyond what's delivered by whatever system it is, whether it's proprietary or open source. So in the current time, one of the most important elements of a library automation system is how open it is. It can be open source, so you have the source code, you can do with it as you please, but almost important, maybe even more important to me, are the application programming interfaces that allow library programmers to extend that system to get new functionality, to report data in and out of it, to be able to connect it to other systems like your Council of Business Systems and all those kinds of things. The APIs are kind of the glue that allows integrators to connect different kind of systems together to let them do things that they weren't designed to do out of the box. Another important thread is mobile computing, that in 2013, I think, is the year that Gartner and others tell us that access to the web via these kinds of devices will exceed traffic based on laptops and desktop and those kind of traditional devices. So if we're not providing access to our services and content through these devices, we're quickly going to be eclipsed. So, one of the things that I think is a huge challenge in libraries of all kinds is to have a much more integrated approach to providing access to our collections and our services through our websites and inside our buildings as well. Focus a little bit more on the library website. When I look at the 60,000 some odd libraries and their websites that I have in my database, I see kind of a lot of fractured approach to service delivery. Here is a search box for our online catalog, DVDs, books, that kind of thing. There's a search box for our website. Here's how you get to our e-journals. Here's how you get to our, our events and services, it's not seamless. When you go to something like Amazon.com, it's all together. You type something into their search box, you're going to find something from all over their enterprise. They're different catalogs, they're different business partners. This is something that the commercial web really emphasizes, is having kind of a unified presence as they face their customers. I think we need to do a lot more of that than we've done in the past. Right now, we're at a stage where I think things are pretty fractured. When you look at a typical online catalog of a library, what's it addressing? It's typically the default search box, right? So if you're an academic library, are you getting all the articles that you subscribe to? Well, you're probably not. Are you getting digital collections from your genealogy and family history collection? Are you getting the digitized images? So you've got to make sure that that search box that you offer to your patrons is truly strategic relative to your content and the services that surround it. So, I'm always looking for patron-facing interfaces that do a better job of that. Beginning in about 2000 with the release of Aqua Browser to about 2009, the emphasis was on next-gen library catalogs. Try to do better than the OPACs that were delivered with the integrated library systems. And they did a little bit better. They looked prettier, they had better relevancy, they had faceted navigation, they had book jackets, but it really didn't change the scope of search that much. You're mostly putting into those the index based on the integrated library system, maybe some federated search out to some limited targets of electronic resources and digital collections, but it really wasn't quite capturing the entire breadth of library collections. A lot of products out there, both open source and proprietary, and the progression that I see are ones that are going from online catalogs to kind of prettier online catalogs to the current phase, which is often called web scale discovery, where you're really indexing the full breadth of collections that libraries care about, which is a pretty optimistic approach. And how you go about that, might be quite different if you're a public or academic library. If you're a public library, you might not care about having 1 billion articles indexed as part of your default search, but you do probably want, a very nice collection of reading materials that address your audience and that have a lot of social engagement kind of features. So in that discovery layer for public libraries, I see the importance of having a lot of kind of Web 2.0 kind of stuff, built right into the infrastructure. So as we go from these local discovery systems to web scale, it starts to build these comprehensive indexes. Here's a picture that illustrates that I hope begin to represent the entire body of what any given library calls its collection. It's not Google, it's not all the messy stuff, it's stuff that the library would sanction as part of its collection. This is probably something that really wouldn't have been possible 5 years ago, but indexing technology through open source components such as Solar Lucene, part of the Apache Foundation, really have a highly scalable technology for indexing. When you think about all of the articles that a library subscribes to, a few 100 million books that are available in things like WorldCat, the universe of content is something like 1 billion items. Well, that used to sound like a lot. Well, 1 billion, it's only 1 billion. So, that is a manageable amount of data in these kinds of indexes that outside the library space are, probably indexing many billions, many times the kind of content that we face in our problem. One of the problems that we have in the library space is our populating those indexes. That, what about the publishers who don't want to make their content available to this or that discovery system? That's kind of the flaw in the fly in the ointment now, is how do you really get all the information into these web scale indexes? So right now there's some that aren't there, and you have to do something to account for that content, where it increasingly is of less value in your collection. I think that in itself kind of motivates publishers to be there, because if you as a library subscribe to a content package not in your discovery service, it doesn't get used, what are the chances you'll renew the next time around? You'll find another provider with similar content that does. So these indexes are getting deeper as well as wider. Increasingly, it's going to be full text, not citation. Isn't it great when kind of every phrase, every chapter heading, every word is an access point? When you think of all the words that are in a book compared to a MARC record that has maybe 250 words in it, the power of these search engines, becomes, much higher as they are populated with the full text content. Things like the HathiTrust alone add a mere 3.5 billion pages to the index, which isn't insignificant. A lot of gaps between what's in the HathiTrust and its repository of scanned content from the Google Book Project and everything else, but it's a mammoth amount of material that we can provide better access to. And once you put it all in an index, then you have to worry about making sure that that index performs very well in terms of relevancy, so that having all the content in the world indexed isn't so good if you can't really deliver responses to a user's query that makes sense. I think that's the challenge today. That's where the state of the art is being worked out, are ever better relevancy algorithms that do a good job of matching the kind of patron that does in a particular area of research, to be able to identify what that patron's really looking for and deliver content that makes sense in that context. So it's very much a huge challenge, but I think that there's a lot of kind of interesting work going on in that space. So you want to be able to evaluate, know what's in the discovery service and not. So that's a problem that I've been involved with for a while. I want to kind of skip ahead and talk about the Open Discovery Initiative. This is a NISO work group. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Jenny Walker to try to set up some best practices about how these discovery indexes are built, with this relationship among libraries who are consumers of these services, publishers who contribute content to these services, and then the discovery service providers who build them. So looking for a better ecosystem that results in a higher level of participation by the publishers and more understanding by libraries how these discovery services ultimately work. So, that's been an interesting project. We're due to wrap that up, I think, in May 2013. We're well along now. We've issued a survey. You see the URL at the bottom there. Please respond to that. Where we're trying to gather information about the different stakeholders' expectations when it comes to discovery into commercial. In the ebook realm, this is really a vital space right now, more in public libraries. I think that, in the academic library space, the scholarly articles was a more immediate problem that public libraries will face to a lesser extent. Well, the shoe's on the other foot when it comes to ebooks. Right now, the general public expects to be able to read ebooks on their e-readers. They want to be able to buy them. They want to be able to check them out from libraries. Right now, they can buy them pretty well, but it's really a mess when it comes to what's going on in libraries relative to different arrangements with publishers and ebook providers about whether or not you can even buy an ebook at any price that might be available in the consumer retail chain. So these are, serious problems that smarter people than me will have to address on the business side. My point of view is that regardless of how things end up on that front, that we need technology systems that do a much better job than some of the ones that we see now at providing a library ebook lending experience that's just as easy as what they get on iTunes or Amazon or whatever the other commercial platform is. We've all heard of the famous 32-step for getting your first ebook downloaded on Overdrive. I think there's a lot of work going on now to try to improve that, including by Overdrive. That, we want to reduce the friction so that it's easier to do that. Yet that's the very thing that the publishers want, is more friction so that individuals will want to buy a book instead of borrow one. But, it's really a tricky area, and, there are some kind of serious technical problems that need to be addressed. I believe in kind of the uniformity of library services regardless of the format of material. I think that you should be able to, when you're searching a catalog, find ebooks along with printed books. When you look at your record, you should see what you have checked out as an ebook, what you've checked out physically. Just be part of the integrated experience as delivered by the library to its patrons. When I look at a lot of ebook lending models now, if you want an ebook, here's our ebook collection, and it jettisons the user out of the library's web presence into some ebook portal or something like that. So I believe in kind of bringing having inward vectors to the library's web presence to kind of strengthen that engagement. Anytime you jettison a user someplace else, you got to be, sometimes that's a good thing. You delivered them to an article they wanted to read. Well, you took them to somebody else's discovery platform for an ebook. That might not be quite as good of a handoff. Be able to do more, as much as you can within the library's own web presence as possible. So there's a lot of good work going on there now. BiblioCommons is doing some nice integration of ebook lending. Circe Dynix, through their eResource Central, has a pretty nice technology platform for that. Polaris, an American vendor, is doing an integration project with 3M Library Services. Overdrive has opened up their API now so that other folks can integrate with that platform. So there's real movement there, but we're not there yet. We've got to be able to deal with things like DRM. I think that in the library world, we consider DRM a pretty ugly concept. But I think our reality is if we don't learn to operate with DRM, at least in the short term, until we convince publishers to relinquish that approach, that we're easily bypassed in the process. So, I think that, it's important to be able to master the technology, make it as invisible to the users as possible, in order to be able to make sure that we plant our stake in this ebook lending arena and not get bypassed. Okay, so that's quite a bit on the discovery side of things. I want to look at the behind-the-scenes kind of technologies, the library management systems that are used more by library staff than by library users. When I look at a lot of the automation implementations in libraries today, I see systems that are largely out of sync with what libraries really do as their strategic priorities. I think the legacy of the integrated library system is one of a high focus on print. And that is not so good at digital and electronic, whether it be, on the e-journal side of things or on the e-book sides of things. So we need systems that have better infrastructure to represent the complexity of our collections across lots of different formats. These new generation systems, I think, are going to be more often delivered in cloud-based platforms that have knowledge bases built into them that improve the efficiency of automation, as I said earlier on. You've got to, and it changes the business model. Instead of being software that you buy or something that you do up front, it's annual support and maintenance for hosting and that kind of thing. In a way that kind of makes proprietary and open source projects more similar because the focus is on the service and the hosting, not so much on access to the software. So there's really a change going on there. So that as you make this change from locally implemented automation systems with their own siloed bibliographic databases, it gives you a chance to start leveraging data that exists in various cloud platforms, whether it be OCLC's WorldCat database and the knowledge base that will come with the new Entota resource, the community zone of Alma or Sky River or whatever the case may be. This knowledge-based approach, is really enabled as you start moving to cloud platforms. As I said earlier, I see a lot of libraries that have automation implementations that are out of sync, and I would say to a certain extent unsustainable, especially in an academic library. It happens in large public libraries as well, but how many pieces and parts does it take to automate the library anymore? You have your integrated library system, you have your electronic resource management system, your open URL link resolver, and it's knowledge-based. You have electronic resource management system or some informal version of that. You have a platform for your digital collections, for your institutional repository. You have various discovery platforms. it's a lot of stuff to make work together. Those of you who are systems librarians and academic libraries know what I'm talking about. So, it's, I think, breaking the back of libraries. Not only does it take a lot of people to operate, but this disjointed approach on the back end inevitably results in a disjointed service delivery approach as well. A good discovery system is a nice Band-Aid in the short term, but in the end, I think we need more unified approaches to managing our operations and our resources. This is a little diagram that I drew about what an integrated library system more or less looks like on the inside, module by module, things like circulation, cataloging, acquisition serials, and online catalog. Those concepts were instantiated in about 1965. I used to say the 70s, but I found some papers that describe a total online system, the first issue of Library Technology Reports, which had a 1965 publication date. So this model is pretty old, and it has incredible traction even today. So we have, whether you're a public library or academic library, academics especially spend the majority of their collection resources on electronic content, but the ILS doesn't really do that. It doesn't manage subscriptions and licenses and all those kinds of things that are an important part of that business process. So maybe you have an electronic resource management system. Well, you probably don't, because of the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of integrated library systems that are deployed worldwide. There's a few hundred electronic resource management systems because they just never got the traction, which is kind of surprising given this transition from print to electronic resources, but those tools did not resonate in the marketplace. I think it had to do with the fact that the idea of managing print and electronic on separate platforms, proved to be too complex and unsustainable. This is what really happens in a lot of libraries, is that you will manage your books, monograph budgets, and your ILS, and then you do all the other stuff kind of on the side with the spreadsheets and databases, homegrown and that kind of thing. So is it really responsible to manage 80% of your resources in this informal manner and not have all the tools that you need to be able to make good decisions about resource allocation and collection management and that kind of thing? When I think about a lot of the technology in place for resource sharing, this is a slide I drew up recently that shows how complicated it is for libraries who have different integrated library systems in a consortia to do things like direct consortial borrowing and that kind of thing. The infrastructure is really complex and unwieldy, so I see that even this aspect of things is going to be hard to sustain in the long term. And I would also say that after all this time, 3 decades or more of library automation, there are incredible gaps remaining in what libraries do where there's not any reasonable support for technology. What kind of support do you get at the reference desk? A business would have a customer relationship management system that supports those who support their users to make sure that you're able to track the activity, to be able to provide the resources to those service providers, and so forth, and that's largely absent in the library space. How well automated is your interlibrary loan office? I think that most aren't. They may have manual systems, they may have systems like Iliad or Clio and so forth that kind of try to fill in some of those gaps, but it's not part of an integrated management approach that libraries need. It's something off to the side. So, I think that it's important to try to make these systems address, everything that libraries do. Work toward comprehensive resource management, comprehensive workflow management, so that library decision makers and library workers can all kind of have the best support for all these varied tasks that we have to do in libraries to operate with more efficiency. We all are trying to do more with less. We have fewer staff than we probably did 5 years ago. And so I think we need automation tools that really help fill in some of those gaps. We need to have tools that deal with metadata in more of a life cycle workflow approach, not the one-by-one approach, and that I think is also kind of largely absent from a lot of the library management systems that we have today. We've got inefficiency kind of hardwired into the system. The new generation of systems is emerging. It's one of the things I've been tracking in the last few years. Right now, they're geared a little bit more toward the academic libraries, but not entirely, with things like OCLC's WorldShare platform that's being positioned for academic, public, and special libraries equally. But as these new systems came out, I didn't want to call them integrated library systems or library management systems anymore. So I kept looking for, well, what are other people calling these? Each company has kind of made up their own term for it. Web scale management services or unified resource management. So I wanted some kind of neutral term that I could use to describe this new genre of software that takes this fundamentally new approach. So I came up with Library Services Platform. I think it kind of fits at least the vision of what I think the next generation of library automation should embody. It's library-specific software. It's got to have the word library in it. Services and all the meanings of the term. It helps libraries perform their services. It embodies a service-oriented architecture. It offers APIs exposed as web services. So services is a great word in this context. And it's a platform in the sense that, you know, it's kind of a big system, which we tend to call a platform in loose terms, but it also fits the platform as a service model in the realm of cloud computing, which means that a library programmer can kind of extend its functionality by addressing the APIs that are exposed to add new functionality to the system that wasn't delivered, you know, as it came. So Library Services Platform is what I'm calling this new generation of systems that has some of these features that I've been pointing toward so far in the talk. This highly shared metadata approach delivered through multi-tenant software as a service, unified workflows across formats, flexibility when it comes to metadata formats. You can edit a MARC record as well as a Dublin Core record, VRA, mods, METs, ONYX, you know, all the different metadata formats that are going to be part of our lives in the future, including things like RDA triple stores. So, you know, you've got to be flexible with metadata if you're building a system today that will be used in the next cycle of technology. And that's about 10 years from now. So you've even got to be thinking about metadata standards that might not be invented yet. The thing that I think that we learned from the previous 30 years of library management is you don't hardwire anything into the system. You build flexible systems that can adapt to the changes in libraries, to the changes in technology as they come, and you don't ever, and hopefully you won't have to start from scratch again anytime soon, though we've said that before. Okay. Okay, that's doing okay in time. So this is what I think a more modern library management model begins to look like, where it's not a monolithic system. It doesn't, you know, it organizes the functionality in different kinds of ways. It provides a service bus that can connect a lot of different kinds of utilities that a library might be involved with. It might organize functionality quite differently. I mean, I don't think that circulation is really the best name to call it a module these days. It's really like fulfillment. Isn't circulation and resource sharing and interlibrary loan and all those kinds of things kind of part of the mission of fulfillment that you can't necessarily slice into the same functional modules that we've done in the last 30 years? Resource description needs to span print, digital, electronic. It's not just cataloging MARC records anymore. So we've got to have a much more modern approach to even how we conceive, you know, the functionality and how we organize that within the broader picture. And we've got to be able to connect to everything, including these discovery services and our counsel services and all those kinds of things. And then the important part of this is that unified presentation layer on top that takes ownership for the entire customer experience. The one thing that I really dislike about a library automation system facing patrons are all these handoffs, where, you know, you're the OPAC, you hand it off to another system and so forth, the interlibrary loan system, you know, fill out our forms, good luck. You know, where you want a system that really takes full ownership for the full, you know, customer experience. And if we can do that, I'll be really happy. So the time that we're in now, I would say, is the beginning of a new phase of library automation. These are phases that take at least 10 years. I would say we're the first year into the 2 years into development, the first year into the deployment of a set of systems that are starting to look more modern relative to what libraries do today. So in the same way that we're familiar with a certain set of brand names of systems today, they will be as unfamiliar 10 years from now as things like Dobus and Nobus are to us today. We're going to see a lot of turnover, I think, in the kinds of systems that we're running in our libraries over time. I think we're in an interesting time where it's not going to be all one approach. I've talked about the diversity that different libraries have and their automation needs. Public libraries and academic libraries and school libraries each may follow different paths. I would say in the academic path, it's kind of in need of more radical, let's rebuild it from the ground up transformation. I see public libraries being more amenable to an evolutionary transition, to some of the systems adapting to some of the challenges they face. I see an interesting mix of open source and proprietary software going into the future. And then I see, these new library services platforms as, just getting their start now, and we'll see how they fare, in this next 10 years. So it's incredibly interesting times, incredibly complicated times, I think. But I think the challenge is for, libraries to kind of think carefully about, where they're going, 10 years from now as they make automation decisions today, or at least 2 or 3 years from now. 10 years is a long ways. Another point that I want to begin closing on is the convergence between automation and discovery that I think will happen in the next phase. In the current phase, I think we're kind of used to the idea of separate discovery services from back-end automation systems. As discovery systems are more knowledge-based driven, as automation systems are more knowledge-based driven, it's going to be harder for those to be provided by separate development organizations. So I see quite a bit of convergence with a lot of notable exceptions where there are some discovery service providers that will continue to be quite successful that will focus on integration with other back-end systems and that kind of thing. But overall, I expect to see more reintegration of the library management problem, maybe getting back to systems that are actually integrated again. I don't want to go back to calling them integrated library systems, but I do see a more integrated approach, possible in the future. So my final thoughts after this kind of whirlwind of information, I think that the problem, though, is urgent, that our lives in libraries have changed very dramatically and our technology support hasn't. So I think that it's, strategic to try to make those realign, that libraries, in fact, may be hindered or damaged if they hold on to automation systems that aren't in line with what they really do. Especially in these times where we just don't have enough resources to have the luxury to operate inefficiently. I think that as the next generation of automation systems evolves, it will kind of make a lot of things kind of at the plumbing level more efficient. That will free up resources for more local innovation. By sharing more, by becoming more efficient on the back end, that hopefully will free up resources so that every individual library service can think creatively about its unique services that it wants to provide to its patrons. We've got to be aggressively collaborative. I think, the more that you focus on your own library as an, isolated organization relative to your partners and peers, I think there's a lot of opportunity to be gained by having the broader perspective. What is your peer group? How can you collaborate? How can you make that transformative to what you do and what you offer your patrons? And then a lot of the technologies that I'm dreaming about here don't exist quite yet. So I would urge you to drive the development of those, whether it be with the commercial vendor you're currently engaged with, open source projects, whatever the means is. You've got to help drive the direction of technology, because you as libraries are the ones that consume this and are kind of damaged when it doesn't progress aggressively enough. So I think I can stop now for a couple of minutes, and then we'll have questions again in a minute. I can catch my breath.
Lots and lots of ideas in there. We've got some time for questions, and we should have somebody with a microphone. Just looking. Yes, lovely. We've got somebody ready with a microphone. So please, if you've got a question, put your hand up and we'll get the microphone to you so everyone can hear what you've got to ask. Tim.
Hi, Tim Darlington, Massey University Library. I just want to say that I kept seeing bits of my own presentation in there about the difficulties of integrating all this stuff together. I've been looking at this, and it seems to me like there's kind of two different things at work here. You've got your knowledge-based type systems like Serial Solutions or whatever, WorldCat, and you've got your traditional library system vendor type systems, and one of them is really good at the electronic subscription side of things, and I'm looking at that and thinking, yeah, that's really what we need. And then the other guys are really good at handling the physical collection, the patron database, the circulation, and I'm looking at those and thinking, well, yeah, but you can't do without that. Do you see some kind of convergence of how those two things are going to come together?
Yeah, I think so. So when I think about the electronic side of things, it's kind of always been done based on knowledge bases, right? No library can kind of keep up with what exists in all these different packages we subscribe to. It changes almost daily, it seems like. So having someone else manage a database, a knowledge base that track those e-journal holdings has really what's made it possible to efficiently manage electronic resources. When we look at the physical side of things, we've kind of had this boutique cataloging approach where, let's try to make the best MARC record and spend, an hour making that record and then hang item records and holding records off of it. And it's a very refined and detailed approach to circulating physical materials. So I think that the answer is a compromise between those two. That I think that on the electronic side, we probably need a little bit more finesse and functionality when it comes to a lot of the complexities there. And I think on the print side, that this knowledge-based approach to description and circulation is really kind of intriguing. At first it seems, is it going to be complex enough to handle all the different policies that libraries come up with? But it also might ask us to maybe compromise a bit on how complicated we make it for our users to actually check out a book. When I look at a lot of library management system circulation policies, it makes you dizzy. The different locations, item types, sub-item types match to, different patron types, sub-patron types in libraries. I defy a lot of library staff members to predict how long it would, a book can be issued for at any given time, because it's just so complicated. So I believe in kind of radical simplification of the circulation fulfillment side of things. I think that it would benefit from some of the knowledge-based approach when it comes to how that metadata is managed. And I also think on the electronic resource management side, there's probably a lot to be gained from some of the more nuanced functionality that's brought over from traditional library management. So I don't know if that dodges your question or answers it.
Kia ora, Penny Carnaby, Lincoln University. Tomorrow, some of us are going to be having a bit of think about the futures of Tupuna, which is our national solution for, bibliographic infrastructure. And I wonder if you'd like to comment. You've talked a lot about collaboration, moving away from doing things a multiple different way and confusing the hell out of our users. I wonder if New Zealand might be better to just have one great big shared cloud-based something. And have you any models? I mean, because we tend to be about the size of your states. So can you give us some thoughts there as we go into a strategic discussion tomorrow?
Yeah, actually, I think I'll be at that strategic discussion tomorrow. But let me mention something that I mentioned at the Katui breakfast this morning, that I do see a future where there are fewer numbers of larger automation implementations. So that means more libraries gathering together at regional levels, state levels, maybe even national levels. When you think, the example that I used this morning was the Illinois Heartland Library System. It serves the lower half of the state of Illinois in the United States. It used to have 5 different consortia that served that state. Well, they've recently decided that they're going to merge into one. And these 5 were already big. So this new consortia with its library automation system, it's going to be Polaris, they haven't implemented it yet, is going to serve 585 libraries. So compared to the 300 and something in New Zealand, it's already quite a bit bigger than that. So I think that the issues of scale are almost moot by now, that it's perfectly conceivable to have national infrastructure in many different countries. Denmark, I think, is exploring that strategy. You see it in other Scandinavian countries. The U.S. is too big for national infrastructure, but a lot of the states are talking about statewide infrastructure. So, it's really, you're better to determine what all of the obstacles to having national infrastructure might be, but they're going to be political and organizational, not technical. And when I look at a lot of the infrastructure designed to do resource sharing in the context of separate automation implementations, it just makes you dizzy. So having a single national infrastructure that allows direct consortial borrowing within a unified system is certainly a lot more elegant technically, though the other still remains possible. So that's just a few words about that.